Hello and welcome to the How Do I series for Microsoft Dynamics Nav. My name is Gerard Conroy and I am a Microsoft Dynamics Nav escalation engineer. In this video I will present how do I automate provisioning of Dynamics Nav 2013 on a Windows Azure virtual machine. At the end of this video, you will know how to run a Windows PowerShell script which automates the provisioning of a new instance of Dynamics Nav 2013 on a single Windows Azure virtual machine. The assumption is made that viewers have already prepared their PC with the necessary tools in order to deploy Nav on Azure using the PowerShell ISE environment. For details about how to prepare your machine, see my previous video titled How Do I Get Started with Provisioning Tools for Windows Azure. The objectives of this video are to become familiar with key sample PowerShell scripts, to create and adjust your customized parameter file, to create your first Nav on Azure virtual machine, and starting the web client and the Windows client on your newly deployed Nav on Azure virtual machine. The steps we will be following throughout this video include Step 1, reviewing the sample PowerShell scripts. Step 2, customizing the parameter file. Step 3, creating a Nav on Azure virtual machine. And Step 4, accessing Dynamics Nav on the Azure virtual machine. When you are preparing your machine to work with the provisioning tools for Azure, one of the steps included copying Nav provisioning tools from the Cloud folder in the Dynamics Nav installation media to your PC. See Step 3 in my previous video, How Do I Get Started with Provisioning Tools for Azure, for further details about this. To review the sample PowerShell scripts, we will open the Windows PowerShell ISE environment. When opening the PowerShell ISE, be sure to run as administrator. This is the location where I have placed the Nav provisioning tools on my machine. There are two PowerShell sample script files which are vital for automating provisioning of Dynamics Nav on a Windows Azure virtual machine. This file contains all of the parameter values which you will need to specify in order to customize the provisioning process for your requirements. Later in this video, we will be making a copy of this file and updating all of the relevant settings in order to create a single machine deployment for Nav on Azure. This is the main PowerShell script which we will be running in order to provision a Nav on Azure single machine instance. Next, we need to make a copy of the set partnersettings.ps1 script file, and we must name the copy set partnersettings-custom.ps1 as this file name is referenced elsewhere in the provisioning process. In the copied file, we can specify the custom values we want to use for our Nav on Azure instance. When we run the provisioning process to create our Nav on Azure instance, this file name will be included along with any parameter settings we configure inside it. We will need to configure several of these settings so that the Nav on Azure instance will be created according to our requirements. Specifically, we need to uncomment and remove the to-do tag, and where necessary we should overwrite the default values with our custom values. Note that each of these settings is documented in the comments just above each one. You can see these settings better if they're in a different color. For our requirements at this time, we can use the default values for each of the settings shown on this slide. For these, we only need to remove the to-do tag. However, as you become familiar with the process, feel free to amend these according to your own requirements. For example, I want to use the default value for this setting, so I just delete the to-do tag. On this slide you can see a list of the settings which I have customized for our demo. Let's take a look at each one. The nav publish settings file parameter refers to where you have placed the publish settings file, which was downloaded when preparing your PC with the necessary tools in order to deploy Nav on Azure using the PowerShell ISE. For details about how to prepare your machine, see my previous video titled How Do I Get Started with Provisioning Tools for Azure. The next setting is the Nav Azure subscription name. This is your Azure subscription name and can be seen on the Azure portal as follows. The next setting is Nav Azure Storage Account. This is the Azure Storage Account which should have been created earlier. For more details, see step 1 in my previous video, How Do I Get Started with Provisioning Tools for Azure. The next setting is Nav Azure Service Name. This is the name you want to use for your VM instance on Azure. Please choose carefully. Whatever name you choose must be unique and will form part of the URL you use to access the Nav client. For example, http mynav01.cloudapp.net. The next setting is Nav Azure Location. Specify the same location you used when you created your storage account. The next setting is Nav OS Image with SQL Server. This should be set to the image name for an operating system image which includes SQL Server. It is a requirement that the relevant image should also have PowerShell remoting enabled. If you do not have a custom image prepared, you can locate one from the Windows Azure Gallery by following these steps. Go to the Windows Azure portal and locate an image which includes SQL Server from the Windows Azure Gallery. Note the label of the image which appears when you hover over it. If you have prepared your PC to provision Nav on Azure as outlined in my previous video, you can now run a PowerShell command to find the image name for the relevant gallery item. In this example, the command would be as shown here. Note that the command should contain the label name you just identified on the Azure portal gallery, as shown here. This command will return the full image name. Use this image name for the Nav OS Image with SQL Server setting in your configuration file. The next setting is Nav DVD Location. This setting should contain a path to the Microsoft Dynamics Nav installation media. In my case, I've stored it here on my C drive. The next setting is Nav Back File. This setting should point to a SQL Server backup file containing the Microsoft Dynamics Nav database you want your Nav on Azure instance to use. For demo purposes, you can use the standard Cronus database backup file, which is available in the Nav installation media in the path shown here. The next setting is Nav License File. This setting should point to the Microsoft Dynamics Nav license file you want your Nav on Azure instance to use. For demo purposes, you can use the sample Cronus license file, which is available in the Nav installation media in the path shown here. The next setting is Nav Client Services PFX file. This setting can point to the sample PFX file myazurevm.pfx, which should be in the Cloud Examples How-To folder you copied to your PC earlier when you were preparing your machine to work with the provisioning tools for Azure. The next setting is Nav Client Services PFX password. This setting should contain the password for the PFX file you specified for the Nav Client Services PFX file setting above. If you are using the sample PFX file, the values should be the same as shown on the current slide. The next setting is $global:\magexe file. This setting should contain the full path to the maj.exe file, which is associated with the manifest generation and editing tool you would have installed on your PC earlier when you were preparing your machine to work with the provisioning tools for Azure. See step 2 in my previous video, How do I get started with provisioning tools for Azure, for more details. When you have configured all your settings appropriately, save the set partner settings -custom.ps1 file. And now we come to step 3, where we actually create an instance of Microsoft Dynamics Nav on a single Windows Azure virtual machine. In the Windows PowerShell ISE, which we opened earlier with Run as Administrator, execute the following command to change the directory to the location on your PC where you copied the nav provisioning tools from the Microsoft Dynamics Nav installation media. Next, open the example1 VM script, which we discussed earlier, if this is not still open from the last step. Press F5 while this script is open, or click on the green Run button to execute this script, which will create the Nav on Azure instance using all of the custom settings we discussed earlier. This will take several minutes to execute, and any errors will appear in red text in the output pane. If you get errors, then press Ctrl+C to stop the script running and then resolve the cause of the errors before rerunning the script. If you do rerun this script, then delete unwanted objects in the Azure portal before trying to run it again in order to avoid duplicate errors. Alternatively, change the nav Azure service name custom value to avoid duplicates when rerunning this script. If you do change the set partner settings custom.ps1 script to resolve problems, be sure to save your changes before attempting to rerun the example1 VM script again. This script normally runs using verbose mode output. If you prefer, you can turn this off in the script files using the verbose preference settings. I am now returning after pausing the recording for approximately 25 minutes. As you can see, the script has run through without any errors, as there is no red text in the output. Note that at the bottom of the script output, it displays details about how to access your new Nav on Azure instance using the Nav Windows client or the web client. For step 4, we are going to access Microsoft Dynamics Nav on the Azure virtual machine instance we just provisioned. We will access the web client, the Windows client, and finally we will use Remote Desktop to log into Windows on your Azure virtual machine. To start the Windows client via click once, simply copy the details from the bottom of the script output as shown here. Click to accept the various terms and conditions and then click on the Install Microsoft Dynamics Nav button. When prompted, provide the credentials indicated in the script output. You may be prompted to change the password. And then the Dynamics Nav Windows client will start. To access the Dynamics Nav web client, again, use the relevant details from the script output. And then the Nav web client will open as expected. Finally, if you would like to access the Windows desktop on your Azure virtual machine, you will need to know the administrator password that was specified in your custom settings here. Next, go to the Azure portal to start a remote desktop connection and highlight your virtual machine as shown here. Then click on the Connect icon to start your remote desktop session. And here you can see I now have access to the desktop on my Azure virtual machine. During this video, we have walked through the steps shown here. In step 1, we reviewed the sample PowerShell scripts. In step 2, we created a copy of the custom parameters file and then updated the settings within it. In step 3, we created a Nav on Azure virtual machine. And in step 4, we accessed Nav on Azure using the Nav web client and also the Nav Windows client. And finally, we accessed the desktop on the Azure virtual machine. This completes our video. How do I automate provisioning of Dynamics Nav 2013 on a Windows Azure virtual machine? Our next video in this how-to series is titled How do I automate provisioning of Dynamics Nav 2013 across 2 Windows Azure virtual machines. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to sharing further episodes of the How Do I series for Microsoft Dynamics Nav.